Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am Celia Johnson. I'm affiliated with Paradigm High School and happy to be with you. I actually had to present a presentation before the State Charter Board a couple of weeks ago, and as I was preparing for it, one of our most challenging things is trying to translate our principles into state acceptable language, and it gets laborious sometimes. And in preparing for this presentation, it was so delightful to think, oh, I don't have to convince anyone that agency-based education is important. You speak my language. I'm just grateful for that. For those of you who don't know much about charter high schools, I'm not sure how many of you know about them. I like to think of them as like a little greenhouse to implement educational ideas on a small scale in hopes that it'll, have an effect on the bigger educational society at some point. They can be started by private entities. Groups of parents can get together and start them. Groups of educators, even businesses can start them. Other district schools can start them. So there's quite a variety and opportunity in charter schools. In our case, it was parents. We had been homeschooling our children primarily. Val and I, my husband, been homeschooling our children for the past, 15 years. But as they got to high school age, we just felt like we wanted to have a bigger network for them, kind of a place where they could grapple with other people's ideas and the ideas of the world before they came out of our house and into college, and we didn't have any, connection there. So we looked around, we didn't find what we wanted, and as we looked at charter schools, I'm going to vary from what I would usually do at this presentation because I feel like I need to talk to you about this part. It was a very spiritual journey for me. As we talked about charter schools, I felt a specific calling from the Lord to start this charter school. And I fought it. I'm sorry to say, but the first thing I said was, I cannot start a school where I cannot speak thy name. It's against all my principles. I don't believe in it. And I don't know if any of you argue with the Lord. I'm sorry, this is sort of a personal story, I guess, but in my personal devotionals, he would bring up, Peter taking the scriptures, the gospel to the Gentiles and saying, what I've called clean, don't call unclean. And please don't think I'm comparing myself to these great prophets. I'm not, but that's what's in the scriptures, right? The next problem was I said, I'm not educated. That field values different things than I do, and I don't even have my degree. Nobody's going to listen to me, And then all the scriptures were Joshua, crossing Jericho, and I'll be in front of you. I'll be behind you. Don't be afraid. I've asked you to do this. And then finally, Moses saying, I'm slow of tongue and speech, and everyone hates me, and the Lord saying, finally, that he was angry with Moses for keeping complaining. So when it got to that point, he just said, this is a part of your personal mission, so just go to it. So we started, and we joined with probably 30 to 50 other homeschool families in our area that we had homeschooled with for years, and they all had kids about our age, and they wanted, something different for them. So we joined together, we studied different schools, we wrote the charter, we took it before the state charter board, and they laughed at us. And the feedback was, you cannot teach teenagers this kind of thing, they can't comprehend it, and you are too idealistic. And so we took the charter back, and this is where we began our process of how to make state acceptable the language. I feel like I'm kind of on the opposite side of what Jesse was saying, how they took the language of, socialist education and turned it into a free style. We're kind of doing the opposite. It's interesting. And the second time around, we came the next year, presented again, and it was passed. So then we were blissfully naive about what it meant to start a charter, and that helped in some ways. So then we went through the rigmarole of all that. And now we're in our 7th year as a charter school. Next year will be about 630 students, and it's been an adventure. It's been a very interesting adventure. The first thing that came clear was we kind of went in thinking this is a broken system, and we wonder how we can help fix it. What can we do? And very quickly it became apparent that it wasn't really a broken system. It was a very well-oiled system, but it was a very different objective that we had. I love John Gatto's quote about how it's the whole objective is to help you know your place in the pyramid, what a good Egyptian should do, And the trouble with that is, if you look at people as an end to someone else's, as a means to someone else's end, instead of an end to themselves, it creates an entirely different picture. The difference, I like to think of it as someone creating a machine which you would value, you'd value according to the capacity of that machine to fulfill its purpose, right, in your agenda, as opposed to a gardener who is raising a seedlet who already has a design inside it. It will become what it's meant to be if you encourage it, if you nurture it. But you're not going to make an apple seed into a cherry tree. It's already designed. That's the simple difference. And the objective makes a very different kind of education. That's why I think I put the analogy about the being on a merry-go-round, because if you have, the horses on a merry-go-round, it's in a pattern. You can predict it, you can measure it, you can track it, and value it according to its stated purpose, right? But if you're on a live horse and you're looking at personal growth, you better be ready to respect the individual differences of people, and you're going to have a lot of starts and stops and bruised shins. So there you go. It's a different kind of thing. And the first thing we did is sat down and said, okay, if we are a resource to the parents, that's one of our fundamental principles. And the handout I gave you, I hope all of you got it. The reason that I chose that is because this is our faculty handbook. It's written in really simple, friendly, lay terms so that anyone can just pick it up and because when you come to mentor, we call our teachers mentors at our school. When you come to mentor at our school, it's hard for those new mentors. So we wrote this in just easy language, but I think it would give you an idea of how we try to implement agency-based education at our school. And at the very end, I gave you a couple of syllabi from our actual scholar classes, so you could see how we formulate it, and also to underline that teenagers can learn this way and love it. In fact, the last one where it has Les Mis in there, and we got to that and we thought, oh, we're having them read so much, we're just going to do the abridged version, and they were so mad. I said, don't cheat us out of our education. We want the whole thing. If you've ever read Les Mis, it's long, but they can comprehend it and they can love it. Okay, so you'll notice the 5th fundamental principle, we consider the school to be a resource to the parents. So we sat down and thought, what is it that the parents need us for? If we're not going to get in their way, then what do they need? And we decided in the first years, they needed us to get out of their way. So we don't do elementary school. We hope that all the children will be schooled in their homes in elementary. It's the ideal place to be. And in high school as well, but hopefully opening up, these are the things that we came to that we could provide that could be a resource to the parents. A gathering space, as was spoken of before, a gathering space that is safe, physically, emotionally, values-based, and et cetera, that would provide different viewpoints. So this is something I hadn't thought about as a young parent, the need for my children to have a different viewpoint than mine. In other words, this is something that I feel like parents should not do, is waver on their viewpoints. We want the parents to be strong in their values and their opinions to their children, right? So where then do those high school going to college-age kids truly grapple with different opinions, different worldviews, different religions. Where does that happen? We wanted a safe place for that to happen. Another thing that we felt like this school could offer would be just a bigger experience of working in teams, choirs, theaters, a bigger experience that way, and resources. So mentors in different subjects, labs, the resources that could be offered. And finally, a bridge to college entrance, if that was their path, a way to provide credit if that's what the parents wanted. So, let's see. Oh, the disconcerting thing was when I was studying this, is the textbooks, the psychological textbooks will say now, they didn't used to say this, but now they will state at 6, there's a point at 5 to 6, and again at 12 and 13, think about those ages for a second, when children will naturally change their base of truth. I don't think they use the base of truth, that's kind of my terminology, but the center from which they base their decisions, from their families to their peers. I thought so much about this as I was studying it. I thought, is that really the natural way of a person's growth, to change their center of decision from their families to their peers? And I thought about how in our homeschooling family, we always talked about that we were trying to give responsibility to our children from which they would base their decisions not on us as parents, but to God, from God. And that wasn't a natural deviation to peers. And so I surveyed the homeschoolers in our school, of which a third of the students in our school have come from homeschooled families, and the entire board are homeschoolers. And asked the parents, when did they see a natural deviation in that toward peers, and at what age, and what was their schooling experience at that time? And without exception, well, there was one exception. The parents reported that when they put their children in to a public school of any kind, 5 days a week, that's when they saw that shift happen. Not necessarily at age 5 and 6, which is first grade, right? Kindergarten, first grade, or 12 and 13, which is middle school, but at whichever age they put them in, and they spent all their time there. So I thought about this a lot, because clearly, even at high school ages, if we want that center of truth to stay grounded in somewhere besides the peers, there's got to be a way to keep the children in their homes more. Even though they need a bigger network, they don't maybe need, like I love Janet's idea of 2 days a week, And Troy Hinkie, who I work with, who has started several different kinds of schools, he said that he found as they got up to 3 days, they still felt the students grounded in their homes. But at 4, that started to switch. And at 5, it definitely switched. So I thought it's something we're studying right now, of how to try to help the parents keep their children's center of truth grounded in the home. Let's see. And at Paradigm we do a whole lot more discussion kind of learning than presentation, so I would welcome your questions as we go. Please feel free to ask questions. Okay, so there are some things that I feel like we've been able to do well at Paradigm, and there are other things that we are still really struggling in. So one of the first things that I feel good about is the love of learning. I say we have a degree of choice at the school. To come to Paradigm, the parents have to take more initiative. It's not easy. There are no buses. There's no school lunch. And, so it takes a choice to come to the school, which helps, because then the kids are more there by choice. It's very hard, since we're required to have state licensed teachers, it's very difficult to find people who can teach agency-based education after going through a state license program. So that's kind of a dilemma. And we're very picky about which mentors we choose, and our interviewing process is highly unlikely. It's like our requirements are that they are full of light. You know what I mean by that? That they're alive and have light and that they can love, their capacity to love, their passion for learning. Those are our top three, which you can imagine is kind of difficult to ask the right questions to bring that out, right? We ask them things like, which 5 books have changed you the most? And they always look at me like, are you asking for my textbooks? And honestly, if they say I haven't read a book since college, they're automatically out, because it is the passion for learning that is inspiring to those students. So we look for mentors that are full of that passion themselves. And then we give them a lot of mentoring, like even though they want to so much, and we're very upfront about that it's not easy, is this gonna be hard, are you sure you wanna do this, you know? And even when they do, it is hard to change that paradigm. So we take them on a retreat in the beginning of the school year and talk a lot about agency-based education. We have what we call the School of Athens, where we break them up into 7 or 8, in a group, and they have their own discussions. They have their own readings, and they have their own discussions where they are growing, and things like that. We give them a lot of leeway. So we say we have a skeletal curriculum, which includes the classics and the great works of the Western world, the great books, things like that. So we have a skeletal, but we have them create their classes according to themes that they are passionate about. So they are amazingly creative, and they come up with really interesting ways of educating. And then we let the students choose those classes according to what they are passionate about. And so that has become really fun. The mentors are alive and growing, and the students are alive and growing, and I feel like the love of learning is strong in the school. The next thing is the deep thinking. This is on our survey last year. This was what the students put down. By far the most that they appreciated about the school is that it helps them to think deeply. And we've tried to figure out how to organize the school so this is possible. For example, in a regular school, you've got the segmented, every 70 minutes you're changing to something else. You're changing to something else. It's hard to pull back and be able to think deeply about anything. So we actually practice being quiet inside, like the inner silence or the inner tuning into the inner part of yourself, which is very hard for the teenagers right now. They have so many windows up in their heads. They have so many electronic devices going all the time. Like they even go to sleep to them, and sometimes I just feel like, can just take a minute and pull back inside, because that's where learning takes place. That's where the true process of coming to truth happens. And so we practice that. We practice how to read deeply, and we do a lot of discussing deeply. We have our classes integrated so that there are 2 or 3 periods at a time where it's just one class. It's English and leadership and history, and like you would in a homeschool kind of. You just put it together. And so they have a chance to have a 2.5-hour discussion that really goes somewhere, and it's not just interrupted in 50 minutes. So we also are religiously inclusive, we call it. In other words, we don't whitewash or exclude religion, which actually in Utah is against the law to separate a curriculum simply because it has religion in it. We do include many religions, so that we can't be accused of having a specific religion. But the kids are able to carry their core books. They talk about their belief systems all the time, because it's very hard to have a strong discussion without being able to talk from your belief system, right? That's where all your ideas come from. That's where you gain your opinions and your conclusions. And so while the mentors step back and are careful about what they put on the students religiously, the students themselves have a lot of leeway in Utah with religion. They can decide to have their prayers in the school. They can decide to have Bible discussions if they want. Students don't know their rights a lot of times religiously, but Utah really has a pretty good law this way. So in our Congress meetings, the students have decided to have prayers before Congress. And anyway, we call ourselves religiously inclusive. So when the accreditors came one year, they come and they visit the different classes, but I wanted them to be a part of this scholar class. This is the advanced class, this is the syllabus you have. I don't want you to think those syllabi are what all our classes are. Those are our advanced classes. And I wanted to be a part of that to see what really the students could do. So we came in, and in that class, the students had practiced discussing for quite several years. And so they were discussing Les Mis and how that applied with Jane Austen's works, Justice and Mercy, and they brought in all their belief systems with it. And, as administrator, I'm always like, oh, I don't know what the students are going to say, right? We're a live horse on a merry-go-round, and you can't predict so well. And the mentor in that class had just stepped back. The kids were very good at just discussing themselves, and they've been doing it for a long time. They really knew how to do it. And as the class went on, we had in there was a Hindu, there were Protestants, Catholic, agnostic, LDS, several different kinds of religious perspectives, and they talked about them, and they were so respectful, and they valued each other. And this is the ironic thing that I have found about being religiously inclusive, is as opposed to the theory that religion is divisive, right, which is always the argument, we have found it to be just the opposite. Those kids are so bonded to each other. They love each other, and they respect one another. And the discussions are intense. They're not shallow. And so we're sitting there with this creditor, and they're just going at it. And I'm thinking we're going to get shut down for sure. But at the end of that discussion, one of the accreditors came out, and she was just weeping. And she said, if the leaders of our nations knew how to speak to each other in this way, the world would be an entirely different place. And I've thought about that ever since. I think that is true. I think if they knew how to discuss different worldviews and different opinions and beliefs in a respectful and valuing way, it would be a different place. So that's one thing I feel good about it. Probably our hardest place is assessment. This is like our Achilles heel. Because the problem with assessment is it stops the growth. If you send off an arrow, you have to stop that arrow to measure how far it went. Does that make sense? It's, again, the growth of the soul is a sacred place. It's not something you want to measure. Consider for a minute how this would work. We said we were trying to write our DERSLs, desired results of student learning, right? We're required to write them. And they have to be trackable and measurable. So we pulled the mentors together and we said, okay, what are we going to write for our DERSLs? And they said, well, we serve the soul of the student. That's up on our wall. We serve the soul of the student. Okay, so what are we doing then? What is our objective? The growth of the soul. Okay, so can you tell when a student is growing? And all of us said yes, immediately. We know when the student is growing. It's obvious. Okay, well, how do you know that? And they looked around at each other. And they smile more. They share with their neighbor. They're excited to learn, all those things that you know about your own children, right? You know when they're growing because it's obvious to you. And so we said, well, so how are we going to track that? Every time they smile, they get a check mark on their, and then the teachers would start to, if you did that, the teachers would start to try to make them smile, right? Their curriculum would be about how can we make the student smile? And then the smile wouldn't be smile anymore. It would be something else, a non-smile, whatever that would be. But it wouldn't be the smile of the soul growing. And so this is our dilemma with assessment. And every time the accreditors come, this is our lowest point because we're not very trackable and measurable. But we are trying to work with some things we've done. For example, we have a school-wide assessment we do annually that has just a few questions on it, like, why did you come to Paradigm? And, we get everything from, my mom makes me do this, I hate school, I don't know why I'm here, to all the way to this school has made all the difference in my life, now I know where I'm going, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we can see the difference in answers there. We could see different answers in writing, the critical thinking and that type of thing. But even so, we keep the portfolios for the students. We can pull a portfolio and say, can you see the difference in the student as the years go on? Whoever looks at that can see it, but it's not easily compilable for a school-wide assessment. So anyway, if any of you have great thoughts on trackable and measurable assessments for the growth of the soul, I'm interested in it. That's not our highest mark at the state. Okay, what's that? Oh, thank you. Do you mean to encourage the accreditors to just take that requirement out? That would be perfect. Anybody who wants to instigate that, please do. That would be great.
We're taking notes.
Yes. If you don't take state funding, do a private school. You don't have to do anything there. Was there another hand? Okay. Another thing that I'm really feel good about is personal mission. We have a saying in the school that is, what is the gift you're going to give? We're very service-based. All the core classes have, they do some kind of service every semester and just have the experience of service. And so the first time, I'm telling you these accreditation stories because they're the points where I get the most nervous, I guess. But once when we were accredited, the gentleman came in and he talked to me first. And he said, "Mrs. Johnson, what's your philosophy around?" And we said, "Well, we feel like every person has a gift that they need to share with the world, and we're here to help them, encourage them, develop that gift. That's how we see ourselves." And he looked at me and he says, "Do you really believe that?" I couldn't believe he said this, but do you really believe that's true? That every student has a gift that they need to give to the world? And I said, yes, I do. I really believe every person has the need to give their gift to the world. And so, anyway, we went through the classrooms, and we came to the leadership class, and he turned on this little 9th grade girl all of a sudden, and he says, "Mrs. Johnson tells me that every person has a gift they need to give to the world. What's your gift?" And she kind of blushed, and she said, "Well, I love to teach people, and so I'd love to become a teacher someday. I think that's my gift that I'd like to give to the world." And then she turned around and she looked at him and she said, "And what's your gift that you give to the world?" And and I was afraid he would think it was impertinent, but at our school that's very acceptable. It's very discussion-based, and we are all learners trying to go toward truth. And so it was perfectly within the rules of the school, and I almost stepped in. I thought, no, don't step in. This is her thing. And the kids just sat and waited for him, but that poor man sat there for a couple of minutes. He turned red. He started to stammer, and he finally just said, "Well, I guess I'm the same as you because I've been in education for 30 years, and I guess that's what I'm doing." And I felt so bad for him. We walked back down the stairs, and he was almost shaking. He said, "No one has ever asked me that question." And I thought about that. I thought, how is it that you could get to the end of your career and, never have asked yourself what the gift that you are going to give to the world? What is that gift? So I feel good about personal mission. And I think that's all I have time to talk about. Do you want me to do question and answer at all?
That's a quick question.
Sure.
Common Core. Isn't this plan it's going to encourage schools to say,
We're waiting to see how much that's going to plan. Right now, we have the option to do what curriculum we want, as long as we can show how the state standards fit in there. So when we have the mentors create their themed classes, we have them create them first, and then we help them put the state standards in where they might fit. So with Common Core, I'm not sure how much that will affect it or not. We're waiting to see. Always our mission is to see how far we can push the envelope. Thank you.